You are mad as hell and not gonna take it anymore with trash radio.
Alright, I know I'm gonna mess this up, so please excuse this and any mispronunciations for this recording, alright? Marie, Joseph, Paul, Yves, Roch, Gilbert, Dumotier, the Marquis de Lafayette, was born at the Château of Chavagnac in Auvergne, France, on the 6th of September, 1757. His father was killed at Minden in 1759, and his mother and his grandfather died in 1770, and thus, at the age of 13, he was left an orphan with a princely fortune. He married at 16 Marie Adrienne François de Noailles, daughter of the Duc d'Ayen and granddaughter of the Duc de Noailles. Look, it's spelled Noailles. Noyette. I'm sure one of you will correct me on this. Then, one of the most influential families in the kingdom. Lafayette chose to follow the career of his father and entered the Guards. Lafayette was 19 and a captain of dragoons when the English colonies in America proclaimed their independence. At the first news of this quarrel, he afterwards wrote in his memoirs, "My heart was enrolled in it." The Count de Broglie, whom he consulted, discouraged his zeal for the cause of liberty. Finding his purpose unchangeable, however, he presented the young enthusiast to Johann Kalb, who was also seeking service in America, and through Silas Deane, American agent in Paris. An arrangement was concluded, and on the 7th of December, 1776, by which Lafayette was to enter the American service as Major General. When this lad of 19, with the command of only what little English he had been able to pick up on his voyage, presented himself to Congress with Deane's authority to demand a commission of the highest rank after the commander-in-chief, his reception was a little chilly. Deane's contracts were so numerous, and for officers of such high rank, that it was impossible for Congress to ratify them without injustice to Americans who had become entitled by their service to promotion. Lafayette appreciated the situation as soon as it was expressed to him, and immediately explained his desire to serve in the American Army upon two conditions: that he should receive no pay, and that he should act as a volunteer. These terms were so different from those made by other foreigners. They had been attended with such substantial sacrifices, and they promised such important indirect advantages that Congress passed a resolution on the 31st of July, 1777, quote, that his services be accepted, and that, in consideration of his zeal, illustrious family connections, he have the mark and commission of Major General of the United States, end quote. Next day, Lafayette met George Washington, whose lifelong friend he became. Congress intended his appointment as purely honorary. The question of giving him a command was left entirely to Washington's discretion. His first battle was Brandywine, the 11th of September, 1777, where he showed courage and activity despite being wounded. Shortly afterwards, he secured what he most desired: the command of a division, the immediate result of a communication from Washington to Congress of November 1st, 1777, in which he said, "The Marquis de Lafayette is extremely solicitous of having command equal to his rank. I do not know in what light Congress will view the matter, but it appears to me, from a consideration of his illustrious and important connections, the attachment which he has manifested for our cause, and the consequences which his return in disgust might produce, that it will be advisable to gratify his wishes, and the more so as several gentlemen from France who came over under some assurances have gone back disappointed in their expectations. His conduct with respect to them stands in a favorable point of view, having interested himself to remove their uneasiness and urged the impropriety of their making any unfavorable representations upon their arrival at home. Besides, he is sensible, discreet in his manners, has made great proficiency in our language, and from the disposition he discovered at the Battle of Brandywine, possesses a large share of bravery and military ardor." Of Lafayette's military career in the United States, there is not much to be said. Though the commander of a division, he never had many troops in his charge, and whatever military talents he possessed were not of the kind which appeared to conspicuous advantage on the theater to which his wealth and family influence, rather than his soldierly gifts, had called him. In the first months of 1778, he commanded troops detailed for the projected expedition against Canada. His retreat from Barren Hill on May 28, 1778, was commended as masterly, and he fought at the Battle of Monmouth June 28th, and received from Congress a formal recognition of his services in the Rhode Island expedition in August 1778. The treaties of commerce and defensive alliance signed by the insurgents in France the 6th of February 1778 were promptly followed by a declaration of war by England against the latter, and Lafayette was asked to leave to revisit France and to consult his king as to the further direction of his services. This leave was readily granted. It was not difficult for Washington to replace the Major General, but it was impossible to find another equally competent, influential, and devoted champion of the American cause near the court of Louis XVI. Lafayette was absent from America about 6 months, and his return was the occasion of a complimentary resolution of Congress. From April until October 1781, he was charged with the defense of Virginia, in which Washington gave him the credit of doing all that was possible with the forces at his disposal. And he showed his zeal by borrowing money on his own account to provide his soldiers with necessaries. The Battle of Yorktown, in which Lafayette bore an honorable, if not a distinguished part, was the last of the war and terminated his military career in the United States. He immediately obtained leave to return to France, where it was supposed he might be useful in negotiations for a general peace. He was also occupied in the preparations for a combined French and Spanish expedition against some of the British West India Islands, of which he had been appointed Chief of Staff, and a formidable fleet assembled at Cadiz. But the armistice signed on the 20th of January, 1783, between the belligerents, put a stop to the expedition. He had been promoted in 1781 to the rank of Major General in the French army, and he received every token of regard from his sovereign and his countrymen. He visited the United States again in 1784 and remained some 5 months as the guest of the nation. Lafayette did not appear again prominently in public life until 1787, though he did good service to the French Protestants and became actively interested in plans to abolish slavery. In 1787, he took his seat in the Assembly of Notables. He demanded, and he alone signed the demand, that the king convoke the States General, thus becoming a leader in the French Revolution. He showed liberal tendencies both in that assembly and after its dispersal, and in 1788 was deprived in consequence of his active command. In 1789, Lafayette was elected to the States General and took a prominent part in its proceedings. He was chosen vice president of the National Assembly and on the 11th of July, 1789, presented a Declaration of Rights, modeled on Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence in 1776. On the 15th of July, the second day of the new regime, Lafayette was chosen by acclamation Colonel General of the new National Guard of Paris. He also proposed the combination of the colors of Paris, red and blue, and the royal white, into the famous tricolor cockade of modern France. For the succeeding 3 years, until the end of the constitutional monarchy in 1792, his history is largely the history of France. His life was beset with very great responsibility and perils, for he was ever the minister of humanity and order among a frenzied people who had come to regard order and humanity as phases of treason. He rescued the Queen from the hands of the populace on the 5th and 6th of October, 1789, saved many humbler victims who had been condemned to death, and he risked his life in many unsuccessful attempts to rescue others. Before this, disgusted with the enormities which he was powerless to prevent, he resigned his commission, but so impossible was it to replace him that he was induced to resume it. In the Constituent Assembly, he pleaded for the abolition of arbitrary imprisonment, for religious tolerance, for popular representation, for the establishment of trial by jury, for the gradual emancipation of slaves, for the freedom of the press, for the abolition of titles of nobility, and the suppression of privileged orders. In February 1790, he refused the supreme command of the National Guard of the kingdom. In May, he founded the Society of 1789, which afterwards became the Feuillants Club. He took a prominent part in the celebration of July 14, 1790, the first anniversary of the destruction of the Bastille. After suppressing some bullshit in April 1791, he again resigned his commission and again compelled to retain it. He was the friend of liberty as well as of order. And when Louis XVI fled to Varennes, he issued orders to stop him. Shortly afterwards, he was made lieutenant general in the army. He commanded the troops in the suppression of some more bullshit on the occasion of the proclamation of the Constitution on September 18th, 1791. After which, feeling that his task was done, he retired into private life. This did not prevent his friends from proposing him for the mayoralty of Paris in opposition to Pétion. When, in December 1791, 3 armies were formed on the western frontier to attack Austria, Lafayette was placed in command of one of them. But events moved faster than Lafayette's moderate and humane republicanism. And seeing that the lives of the king and queen were each day more and more in danger, he opposed himself to the further advance of the Jacobin party, intending eventually to use his army for the restoration of a limited monarchy. On the 19th of August, 1792, the Assembly declared him a traitor. He was compelled to take refuge in the neutral territory of Liège, whence, as one of the prime movers in the revolution, he was taken and held as a prisoner of state for 5 years. First in Prussian and afterwards in Austrian prisons, in spite of the intercession of America and the pleadings of his wife. Napoleon, however, though he had a low opinion of his capacities, stipulated in the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797 for Lafayette's release. He was not allowed to return to France by the Directory. He returned in 1799. In 1802, voted against the life consulate of Napoleon. And in 1804, he voted against the imperial title. He lived in retirement during the First Empire, but returned to public affairs under the First Restoration, and took some part in the political events of the 100 Days. From 1818 to 1824, he was deputy for the Sarthe, speaking and voting always on the liberal side, and even becoming a Carbonaro. I don't know if it's Sarthe or Sarthe, S-A-R-T-H-E. We're keeping it. He then revisited America, July 1824 to September 1825, where he was overwhelmed with popular applause and voted the sum of $200,000 and a township of land. From 1825 to his death, he sat in the Chamber of Deputies for Meaux. During the Revolution of 1830, he again took command of the National Guard and pursued the same line of conduct with equal want of success as in the First Revolution. In 1834, he made his last speech on behalf of Polish political refugees. He died at Paris the 20th of May, 1834. In 1876, in the city of New York, a monument was erected to him. And in 1883, another was erected at Puy. Few men have owed more of their success and usefulness to their family rank than Lafayette, and still fewer have abused it less. He never achieved distinction in the field, and his political career proved him to be incapable of ruling a great national movement. But he had strong convictions which always impelled him to study the interests of humanity and a pertinency in maintaining them. Few men have owed more of their success and usefulness to their family rank than Lafayette, and still fewer have abused it less. He never achieved distinction in the field, and in his political career proved him to be incapable of ruling a great national movement. But he had strong convictions which always impelled him to study the interests of humanity and a pertinency in maintaining them, which, in all the strange vicissitudes of his eventful life, secured him a very unusual measure of public respect. No citizen of a foreign country has ever had so many and such warm admirers in America. Nor does any statesman in France appear to have ever possessed uninterruptedly for so many years so large a measure of popular influence and respect. He had what Jefferson called a canine appetite for popularity and fame. But in him, the appetite only seemed to make him more anxious to merit the fame which he enjoyed. He was brave to rashness, and he never shrank from danger or responsibility if he saw the way open to spare life or suffering, to protect the defenseless, to sustain the law, and preserve order.
Originally, this comedic team of 5 Brits and 1 Yank came together to author and star in 2 45-minute episodes of Fliegender Circus, a German version of the soon-to-exist British comedy show. The team: John Cleese, Michael Palin, Graham Chapman, Terry Jones, Terry Gilliam, and Eric Idle, learned German phonetically, except for Cleese and Jones, who spoke relatively well already. This was rather like the Beatles, semi-contemporaries of the group, who performed in Germany prior to their big break in the States and Britain. Monty Python's Flying Circus was wildly popular in the United Kingdom, as well as quite controversial, especially among the church and royal family. Both were common targets for the absurdist group. One particularly interesting habit of the Pythons was their propensity for performing in drag as well as in the nude. Terry Jones was rather prone to appearing naked on TV, and even the traditionally stoic John Cleese showed up in knickers and skirts no fewer than 20 times over the course of the 4-year show. In 1971, Cleese left the group to pursue his own projects. The troupe stumbled on through their 4th and final season, only producing 6 episodes. While much of the season was considered inferior to the original 3 seasons, there was a bright point of the Michael Ellis episode, largely considered to break through the barrier from comedy to art. The first Python movie was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, a farcical jaunt through the Middle Ages of England, following a prancing King Arthur and his merry band of roughshod knights. When the film premiered in New York, the first 3,000 viewers were given free coconuts. For their second film, the Pythons tackled the story of Brian, a contemporary of Christ. The life of Brian was considered too controversial for any large Hollywood backer to sign on, and floundered in the abyss for almost a year. Finally, the late Beatle, George Harrison, put up the funding needed to complete the project. Harrison is listed as producer in the credits of the film, and even makes a tiny cameo in the movie, being jostled around in a crowd scene. The final Python film, The Meaning of Life, is vastly underrated and hardly mentioned when held up to the infinitely clever Life of Brian and the often overquoted Holy Grail. Never mind what some consider to be either the most disgusting or the best vomit scene ever filmed. Truly a high point in filmmaking. Today, the Pythons are mostly alive. Animator Terry Gilliam, the only American in the group, is now a respected filmmaker, despite the utter failure of some of his recent endeavors, including Don Quixote. His other films include Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Brazil, Time Bandits, and 12 Monkeys. Michael Palin and John Cleese continue to act, sometimes together, as in Fierce Creatures and A Fish Called Wanda. Eric Idle, usually considered to be the sellout of the bunch, staged a tour of the United States in which he and a group of hand-picked actors performed old Monty Python skits to rabid fans. He originally had wanted to tour with the real Pythons, but was unable to roust them from their cushy retirement positions. Terry Jones owned a brewery in England, and aside from brief cameos in small productions and a South Park short, he remained out the public eye until his death in early 2020. Or was it 2021? Let me double check. Yep, 2020. Finally, Graham Chapman came over all dead. He was cremated, and his ashes were accidentally spilled across the stage during a Python reunion interview. As a boy, Terry Gilliam read Mad magazine, and in college, he worked for a student publication called Fang. When he became Fang's editor, he remodeled the magazine in the image of Mad and started sending complimentary copies to Mad's Harvey Kurtzman. After graduation, Kurtzman offered Gilliam a job at Help, a more adult descendant of Mad. Gilliam met John Cleese when the British comedian was touring New York, and Cleese briefly appeared in a photo shoot for Help. Several years later, Help went out of business, and Gilliam worked in advertising and drew a comic strip for a surfing magazine. He eventually moved to Paris, where he worked as a cartoonist, and later to London, where he found no work at all, until he called Cleese for advice. With a recommendation from Cleese, Gilliam was hired as a writer for the British skit show Do Not Adjust Your Set, starring David Jason and featuring Eric Idle, Terry Jones, and Michael Palin in background roles. With his background in cartooning, Gilliam was soon given responsibility for creating animated sequences for the program. He had never done animation before, and he has said that he devised his unique bare-bones style simply because it was cheap and easy. When Do Not Adjust Your Set was canceled, Gilliam joined Cleese, Idle, Jones, Palin, and Graham Chapman in creating Monty Python's Flying Circus for the BBC. Gilliam was the only American member of the otherwise British troupe, and he was responsible for all the program's animated sequences. He has said that his castmates generally left him alone, offered no advice or interference, and that he had a free creative hand to animate whatever he could imagine. When he appeared in the flesh in Python sketches, he usually had thankless bits or wore drag. In his most memorable bit as an on-camera performer, he played Cardinal Fang in the Spanish Inquisition sketch. When the Python gang reunited to make Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Jones and Gilliam were chosen as co-directors. As a film director, Gilliam is now known for vivid adventures with political undertones and absurd special effects. Gilliam's films could not be mistaken for anyone else's work, and rarely tell the story audiences might expect. For instance, in Time Bandits, with Sean Connery and Shelley Duvall, dwarves steal a map of all time and space from the Supreme Being. In The Fisher King, homeless Robin Williams falls for the lovely Amanda Plummer, while commuters, nuns, sailors, and Hasidic Jews dance in Grand Central Station. In 12 Monkeys, future time travelers return to the modern day to research a plague that will kill 99% of humanity. In The Brothers Grimm, with Matt Damon and Heath Ledger, the storytellers are reimagined as conmen. In Gilliam's most famous work, Brazil, Gilliam envisions a totalitarian society racked by terrorism, where an ordinary office worker seeks solace and strength from his own imagination. The film was released to good reviews in Europe, but sat on the shelf for months in America, as the studio insisted upon changing Gilliam's bleak ending. Gilliam, of course, refused, and 9 months after the film opened in Europe, he bought an ad in Daily Variety, trolling the chairman of Universal Studios with one simple question, filling an entire page. When are you going to release my film, Brazil? When the Los Angeles Film Critics Association gave the still unreleased Brazil its award as Best Picture of the Year. The studio relented and finally released a shortened version of the film that had played in Europe. Gilliam had the last laugh a few years later when his director's cut was finally released in America and became a perennial favorite at midnight shows and revival theaters. With the advent of home video, the film has found its audience and is frequently cited on critics' best films ever lists. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, based on the stories of R.E. Raspe, was plagued with cost overruns, and Gilliam's later attempt to film The Man Who Killed Don Quixote with Johnny Depp was cut short when the horrendous weather and the leading actor's poor health made filming impossible. Most of Gilliam's films have been on time and on price, but with the squabbles behind the scenes in Brazil, Gilliam has a reputation as a difficult director, and he has had numerous projects quashed and developed. He admits to a cheerful response whenever a mainstream Hollywood action film does poorly at the box office. In 1975, ABC purchased rights to Monty Python's Flying Circus from the BBC and began airing haphazardly re-edited highlights as part of the American network's late-night Wide World. In addition to inserting commercials and making cuts that fractured the continuity of the interconnected skits, Gilliam particularly objected to ABC repeatedly bleeping out such words as naughty bits, even though the program aired at midnight. Gilliam filed suit, and the case moved too slowly to stop ABC's butchery of the program. But the court ruled in Gilliam and Python's favor. In a landmark decision, the court decided that ABC's large-scale changes in the program constituted copyright infringement, and members of Monty Python regained the rights to the original series. The original episodes still air, but never edited and never with commercials. Gilliam's wife and children are British, and he became a British citizen in the 1970s, holding dual citizenship for decades. In 2006, though, Gilliam legally renounced his American citizenship, complaining that he does not object to having his estate taxed by England when he dies, since England is where he made his fame and fortune. But he does not want his wife and children's inheritance to, quote, build bombs. That's awful, end quote. Referring to the occupation of Iraq, Gilliam said he was, quote, seriously considering suing George Bush, Cheney, and the gang for making an illegal and unauthorized remake of Brazil, end quote. This fucking guy. Terry Jones studied medieval literature at Oxford, where he met classmate Michael Palin. They both went on to work at the BBC and joined several not yet discovered stars, including Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Marty Feldman, and Eric Idle, writing for The Frost Report, a satirical half-hour news program with David Frost. After writing for several other series, Jones stepped in front of the camera to perform in an increasingly Python-esque ensemble for 2 years on Do Not Adjust Your Set. As that show ended, Monty Python's Flying Circus began, with Chapman, Cleese, Idle, Jones, Palin, and the program's only American, Terry Gilliam. Fellow Pythons say Jones was among the most involved in the program's writing and had a fervent drive for perfection, and frequently butted heads backstage with John Cleese. In early clashes with BBC, Jones fought ferociously to keep the program true to its original anarchic intent, and succeeded. Monty Python famously skewered everything good and right about Western civilization, and became a smash hit on both sides of the Atlantic, while still remaining popular and influential. Even as the original Monty Python was still in production, Jones also wrote comedy for the two Ronnies, and he wrote, with Palin, an episode of the anthology Black and Blue, combining chocolate and cannibalism for laughs. 15 years later, the teleplay from that episode was expanded into a feature film, Consuming Passions, with Jonathan Pryce. Monty Python's Flying Circus ran 5 seasons and spawned several movies, with Jones and Gilliam sharing directing duties on Monty Python and the Holy Grail and The Meaning of Life, and Jones alone helming The Life of Brian. His career as a film director sputtered post-Python, with 3 features that were quite good but poorly received. Personal Services is a serious comedy with Julie Walters as a whorehouse madam with a heart of gold, but is a complete departure from all things Python. The more slapstick and generally absurd Eric the Viking is based on Jones's children's book and stars Tim Robbins and Mickey Rooney. The last film Jones directed was The Wind in the Willows, released on video as Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, a family fantasy with Jones himself as Mr. Toad and Steve Coogan as the mole. But it was produced for the Disney Corporation, then sold to another studio and haphazardly released with little publicity. Jones wrote the scholarly and dead serious Chaucer's Knight, Portrait of a Medieval Mercenary, the non-fiction Who Murdered Chaucer, a Medieval Mystery, and contributed to the Discovery Channel's Hidden History of Egypt. He has written several children's books, including The Curse of the Vampire Socks, The Beast with 1,000 Teeth, and with co-author Palin, Dr. Fogg's Encyclopedia of All Knowledge. He also hosted the light-hearted Medieval Lives on BBC, and wrote the screenplay for Jim Henson's engaging big-screen Labyrinth, starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. He has also written numerous columns for Britain's Guardian and Observer, lambasting Tony Blair, George W. Bush, and their invasion of Iraq. Tony Blair's dedication to carrying out the policies of the White House, Jones wrote in 2002, proves time and again that he has the courage of their convictions. In his 60s, Jones suffered from arthritis and walked with a cane. In 2006, he was diagnosed with colon cancer, but it was not enough to keep him from attending the London premiere of Spamalot, the play based on Monty Python and the Holy Grail, starring Tim Curry. The next morning, Jones underwent cancer surgery and explained in a brief press release, "Unfortunately, my illness is not nearly bad enough to sell many newspapers, and the prognosis is even more disappointing." In 2015, Jones was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, and with the support of his friends, remained active until early 2020. There is an Anatomy of the Heads album you don't know you love, you have yet to purchase. So when you do, understand you are helping them get one step closer to touring the United States. The DVD will come with bonus footage, including Michael Van Gogh filming Jay Heidenreich and the Fisherman, scrolling on Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge, as they both look on in low-key bewilderment. How and why so many doctors, lawyers, nurses, and even a few higher education teachers are such freaks?
There were plenty of black women from the former German colonies and from assorted African enemies of the Allies serving the Third Reich, not as war fighters, but as nurses and auxiliaries. If the mere memory of black people serving Nazi Germany angers you, knowing that there are still a few 100,000 Namibians who speak Kutchendeutsch at home is probably going to drive you insane. A neighbor of mine came out of one of the world's ostensibly premier communication research PhD programs in the 80s. He was offered a prestigious position as a quaint in the research department of one of the big legacy media networks. He asked them what they considered the strongest item in their research portfolio that he'd be a part of. Their reply was that they were doing research to determine what color vest their Uberstar nightly news anchor wore that triggered the strongest feelings in the audience of trust and credibility. That wasn't the only such offer, nor even the worst. He rejected them all. Point being, they literally, without exaggeration, no shit really, have used this technology for at least 80 years to turn humans more or less into NPCs. Reality TV show where 20 intensely transphobic women are put in a house together and told one of them is secretly trans. Sharon, stop fucking watching me pee. That sounds like male aggression to me. No real woman wears size 11 shoes. Did your voice just drop an octave? Get your giant man hands off me. And you'll hear all that by the end of the first episode. And now, today's feminine challenge. Eat a cheeseburger with full makeup on. Calm a baby. Navigate a wet mall parking lot in heels. Get 10 strangers to hold the door open. His name was Seth Good Enough to Fuck Your Mother Rich. They say M&Ms melt in your mouth, not in your hand. But guess what? We've been holding Skittles this whole fucking time. South Dakota, now barely habitable after extensive terraforming. So there was this one time in the twilight of Sparta's years, long after glory days, when they barely had 1,000 citizen soldiers to speak of. At this time, Pyrrhus of Epirus was gallivanting around Greece, making one enemy after another. He had just annihilated Macedon and marched into Peloponnese to capture Sparta, while their main army was in Crete because reasons. He surprised the Spartans and besieged their capital, which had no walls, by the way. All that was left in the city were about 2,000 slaves, old men, kids, and women. The Spartan government tried to evacuate the women and children, but the women refused to abandon Sparta. Moved by their courage, the men built a makeshift wall on the southern side of the city to repel the Epirot attack. The women worked alongside the men in desperation, often pleading with the men to rest lest they become too tired from work to fight. Finally, the Epirots attacked, again and again. The nearly 30,000 army, with dozens of elephants, were repulsed by nothing but 2,000 men and women. Each time the Epirots tore down the wall, it was rebuilt. Eventually, Pyrrhus gave up and attacked Argos, where he was killed. Thus ended one of the most amazing careers of any king. Sports ball is in trouble for the long term. Cord cutting in countless homes without traditional CATV is real, and it will only multiply the problems. Let's go Mets. Just watched Sully. It took me back to the Miracle on the Hudson and how no one denounced Sully as a white male at the time and said that's why he was getting attention. You know, that's all people would be talking about today. The culture of 2009 seems very foreign. I forget the name of this restaurant, but it was in San Diego County, and they had a food challenge. My friend and I decided to do it, but just as a way to split the food. It was basically a mountain of diner food on a platter for $40. We couldn't finish the single challenge serving together and threw up. We had 2 boxes of leftovers after. If one person can finish it all in the hour, they got a photo on the wall. My friend later died of a heroin overdose, but that's life, I guess. Fortune cookies were invented in California by a Japanese guy. Teriyaki was invented in America by Koreans. Sushi was invented in Arizona by Mexicans. And Mexico was invented in Japan by the Chinese. The circle is closed. The hippies voted in Ronald Reagan. Remember that. When the Midwest isn't getting suffocated by opioids or having farmland and food processing plants catch fire in between the grain silo fires, it gets flooded. And it not only messes up the price of everything at the grocery store, but countless people and their families who make a living working the soil. Well, if we all stop eating animals, I'm sure the weather and ozone layer will unfuck themselves and the ocean will be fine. The opioids will go away. And the weather machine is finally unplugged. The news is written exclusively for stupid old jerks. A lot of left-leaning sad sacks and ham galaxies get to their present political positions by a very convoluted, theory-driven route that subverts common-sense perspectives of the world. If you ask a man who isn't attractively impaired, they'll tell you a lot of women on Tinder have the same boring-ass things to say to men that they scream they don't want men to say to them. Almost every woman I know that has her shit together is not on Tinder. And bringing it up is like asking one of them to go colostomy bag shopping with me. Due to its durability and reliability, the Toyota Hilux, along with the larger Toyota Land Cruiser, has become popular among militant groups in war-torn regions as a technical. According to terrorism analyst Andrew Exum, the Hilux is the vehicular equivalent of the AK-47. It's ubiquitous to insurgent warfare. U.S. counter-terror officials have inquired with Toyota how the Salafi jihadist extremist group Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has apparently acquired large numbers of Toyota Hiluxes and Land Cruisers. Mark Wallace, the CEO of the Counter-Extremism Project, said, quote, "Regrettably, the Toyota Land Cruiser and Hilux have effectively become almost part of the ISIS brand," end quote. The 1980s Toyota War between Libya and Chad was named so because of the heavy use of Hilux trucks as light cavalry vehicles. Truth cannot exist in the absence of revealed evidence. Twitter can access all the nudes you've ever sent or received on your phone without you ever having uploaded them on there, just by installing the app. Hey, is your neighborhood getting gentrified? Has it already been gentrified? Let us know if there are any vegetarian or vegan places out there. They serve things so alien-looking it either looks like the Nasty Patty or something that's only weak against bug, poison, fire, or flying damage. In England, you can get caught snorting cocaine and get a slap on the wrist. In the United States, you become a felon, get locked up for a long time, and face realities of violence from the guards, other inmates, rape, the erosion of your soul, solitary confinement, maybe even joining a gang. But it's okay. We have guns and free speech. War is an interface, the fastest exchange of information between opposing cultures. Before the 1970s, wheat was okay. It was just hybridized a few times naturally. But in the 70s, Norman Borlaug made some kind of high-yield, semi-dwarf wheat variant, which paved the way towards Clearfield wheat, a plant that's designed to withstand herbicide. So of course, they drown it in herbicide. Clearfield and high-yield semi-dwarf are estimated to be 99% of the current U.S. wheat supply. The wheat we eat today isn't the same wheat Jesus or the Romans ate. When I was a kid, I thought we were going to the stars, but we invaded the Middle East and put our spaceships in museums. White women aren't stupid. Even the black Hebrew Israelites will say they're cunning and opportunistic at best, but follow it up with pointing out how they're erratic and insecure. We live in mumbo-jumbo times. People crave safety and security. This is especially true for women. Intersectionality promised white women a big tent full of allies, brimming with lip service to pay, and all the signaling you can allow yourself to succumb to. Bless their hearts.
What's up, ladies and jerks? You like things that don't suck. So for more of the finest garbage this side of meat space, come on down to the Trash Radio Patreon. I can't promise that my buttery, trashy voice will stop rearranging things in your living room when you're not home.